Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to Hey Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version. Hello, welcome to another episode of Hey Strangeness. Today, I got my buddy Aaron Deese on. You may know him as the author of the Texas Dogman Triangle, also the wonderful film, The Dogman Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State. That's how I found out about you. And it's from Small Town Monsters, and I absolutely love the documentary. Aaron, what's going on, pal? How are you?
Man, I'm on Hey Strangeness, so I'm living the dream. This is a bucket list day. I'm happy. I'm happy.
And I didn't even get to finish the last part. You also host a wonderful podcast, which I was on a couple weeks ago, called Hey Strangeness. Yeah. So I already have to just compliment you. Great taste in titles.
Thank you. I would say the same as well. I feel like, I think I mentioned this in our episode, the other episode we did together, but I feel we both came up with unimpeachable titles for our respective shows, and that really set the standard very high. So
Thank you. You're right. Well, there is something I think with, because I don't really dwell on the sinister aspects of a lot of these, topics. And I'm just saying hey to it. Like, hello, how are you doing? I'm inviting you into my life. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the strangeness. Hello, how are you doing?
Love it. Yeah. And I think I like to take that approach as well. And that's kind of where Hey Strangeness started, which was kind of my entry into this world as a quote creative person. It's just going, hey, this is strange, let's talk about it. And my wife was co-hosting the show with me at the time, and it was just kind of that, just us going, hey, what's this about? And then I stumbled into like the Dogman stuff, and that completely changed the course of my entire life.
Right.
But I love to embrace the absurdity of this stuff, because that's where it starts, is the hey, what's going on here? But anyway,
right. Well, and now I feel like it's important to embrace the absurdity, because that is, whether you like it or not, a big aspect of all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Agreed.
So would you mind just, I had a bio that I kind of wrote out for you, but it was like not well written. I tried to read, but I'll be honest, I did a take trying to read the bio, and I messed it up so hard. So I'm going to let you kind of just tell the audience. Everyone probably knows who you are, but just in case, tell us a little about what you do. And then we'll deconstruct from there, my friend.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Yeah, my name's Aaron. Presently, I am a writer and producer for Small Town Monsters.
Hell yes.
We are a documentary film company that specializes in productions about the strange and unsolved. And our primary focus is the people who have these experiences and the ways in which they are impacted. So that's what I do for my day job. And then I also produce Hey Strangeness, which is an on-again, off-again podcast that I use to experiment and dig into more outrageous stories that don't belong anywhere else with anything else I'm doing. So that's a lot of fun. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I have a 2-year-old son who is my number one little buddy, and he's great. And when I'm not hanging out with him, I do this stuff. So life is good. That's me, I suppose.
That's a wonderful balance. You got your best little buddy, like taking a nap right now. And, here you are talking about weird stuff in the middle of the afternoon.
It's a good life, man. Yeah. They say that like the phenomenon chooses you, but I kind of feel like this whole creative, strange world chose me, because I started it as a hobby, just something to do during the pandemic, a way to cope with depression. And it became something I was truly passionate about. And then I get the chance to network with people like, the crew over at Small Town Monsters and you, and like have conversations like this. So I feel very fortunate, very blessed, lucky, whatever you want.
That kind of leads me into my opening question, my friend. And that is, how did you get into this stuff? Did you have a strange experience, or like were you just like one of those kids like myself who's just like, wow, this weird stuff is awesome, and then
more the second one. I've had a couple strange experiences, but they weren't things that like changed my life and sent me into this stuff. I always have felt the world was stranger and bigger than what most of us probably give it credit for. And part of that comes from growing up in the church and being open to ideas about things that we would consider impossible. I
Mhm.
did martial arts for a very long time, and
Mm.
there is a metaphysical aspect to some of that, some of those philosophies. And my teachers were more practically grounded, but they would still teach us about these things. And so growing up with that, I was like, wow, there's a lot in the world that I don't understand, that maybe
Yeah.
science doesn't even understand yet. And then getting into cryptozoology, that kind of happened as a teenager, sort of organically. I was,
Uh-huh.
13, 14 when the Mothman Prophecies came out. I saw it on opening night. I loved that
Mhm.
movie. I had just finished reading the book, The Mothman Prophecies by
Oh,
John
yeah.
Keel.
Yeah.
And
Mind blower.
mind blower, because you read that book, there are a few books I could put in this category, but that's one that's a watershed for a lot of people, because you read that
Uh-huh.
book and you go, you know what? Even if I don't believe these things happened, these people do. And if even one of these strange events actually took place the way it's described, we can't explain it. And that changes
Yeah.
everything we know about reality. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the crux for me with a lot of this stuff, is it only takes one truly inexplicable case
Yeah.
to flip everything on its head. And that's what
I
kind of
agree.
keeps bringing me back. And I guess what got me into this from, part-time hobby to full-time job.
Right. Right. Oh, that's interesting. So, in a way, cryptozoology, would you say, was kind of the gateway drug into all the strange and unusual?
Probably, yeah. I've always been interested in UFOs.
Mhm.
Ghosts are one of those things that, I guess I've always taken for granted, and any skeptically minded
I hear
listeners
you.
right now are going to shut down, and that's totally fine. But it's one of those things that is experienced so frequently by so many people, has been talked about for so long, and even skeptical people, even people who are not as receptive to the paranormal,
Most
will
definitely.
sometimes tell you, yeah, I did have a weird experience once, though. I did get a weird feeling, hear a voice, see a figure out of the corner of my eye. So I've
Yeah.
always just, not that ghosts are boring, but I just feel like, yeah, of course ghosts are out there, whatever. Cryptids, for me, it presents us with a really diverse set of data, because you have the more empirically documented ones like the Texas chupacabra, and in my opinion, Bigfoot, where we do have a lot of
Mhm.
physical evidence. And then you have the
Mhm.
more outrageous ones like, say, I don't know, the Ozark Howler could be a regular animal. Braxy, the Flatwoods Monster, or the
Yeah.
Caracas dwarves that end up in,
Absolutely.
right? Like they end up in
Or those little tin
UFO.
can aliens who get off a rocket. Yeah, like
Yes, yes. Like they're so far outside of what we think of as known zoology, but then we look at it and we go, okay, but is this still the search for an undiscovered animal? And it just has so many layers for me. It ventures into the spiritual as well as the physical. And I know there are
totally.
people who are very hard-lined about, well, true cryptozoology means this, and these stories don't fit the bill as being cryptids.
Right.
That's fine. We could split hairs over that all day.
Yeah.
But I guess I just really like monsters is where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. No, that's an excellent answer though, because like I can already tell, and like I kind of know this, but like like I do feel that once you get fixed ideas with any of this stuff, like it's fine. I'm not like saying like that's wrong, but like for me, it feels like a little bit disingenuous because nobody knows.
Mhm.
And so you don't like, I mean, like, I don't know. I have my ideas. Those ideas change all the time. Like by the end
Yes.
of this podcast, I may have a totally new idea about what I think about Dogman, for instance.
Right.
And that's wonderful because I'm open to learning about this stuff and taking people's experiences and like collate them and say like, well, there's a pattern here, there's a pattern there.
Mhm, mhm.
But no, that's very interesting to me. So I want to ask you this, and we're gonna get into your book and your wonderful film. But I want to ask you this because you were born and raised in Texas.
So I'm actually from Central Florida.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah, that's where most of my family's from. It's where I grew up, and then I moved to Texas. Actually, at this point, I might have spent more. Not quite. I moved to Texas when I was about 19, and then I
okay.
met my wife, and life just happened here. There was never
Yeah, yeah,
hasn't been a good
yeah.
reason to leave. But yeah, I'm kind of a half Florida, half Texas hybrid, I guess, by this point.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess this, you can still answer this question. Like, I guess, like, I've lived in California longer than I've lived in Nebraska. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like you. My life has been sort of split.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
now I'm back in Nebraska, and I have become obsessed in the last 4 years, 3 or 4 years, I would say, with local Nebraska high strangeness, folklore, mythology, that kind of stuff. Are you finding yourself now that you've been in Texas for a while? Like you said, you've lived maybe over half your life. Are you fascinated by the local high strangeness around you?
Definitely, definitely, man. And I kind of have an unfair advantage in Texas because it is so big. It is the
Yeah,
largest state in the continental United States, aside from
it's
Alaska.
like 3 countries.
Yeah, it could be
Literally.
and has
Yeah.
been its own country on more than one
Right. Right.
occasion. So we have this grand intermixing of heritages and cultures. You know, you have the Native Americans, of course, who were here first. You have Mesoamerican and Latin American folklore, because all of this was Mexico at one point. Then you have the, you know, I almost said native. Sorry. You have the European settlers who came later and brought stories and folklore with them. And then you have just, you know, we have a very diverse population in our major cities in Texas. So we have all these other cool systems and beliefs and ideas that have been brought in from literally all over the world.
That's so wonderful.
So it's, yeah, I love it, man. It really is. There are plenty of negative things I could say about Texas, but I'm emphasizing the positive today. It really is like a, thank you. Yeah. It really is a melting pot of different belief systems and cultures and folklore. And when you're interested in the strange stuff, that is wonderful, because you'll have all of these stories going back, you know, a couple centuries in some cases, like with the Dogman stuff, where you have to look at this stuff and go, wow, look, these people, way before we even had the term cryptozoology, way before anybody was talking about ghost hunting or UFO sightings, they were still seeing these things and talking about it. And that's true all over the country. But Texas is such a hotbed of pretty much every paranormal phenomenon, but especially the big three: cryptids, UFOs, and ghosts. So certainly, short answer, yeah, there's a lot of local legends and area folklore that you can spend days, hours digging into. I've done whole podcast episodes on just local San Antonio urban legends that people are still talking about, you know. So yeah,
you could probably just make Texas your laboratory and just talk about Texas the rest of your life, and then still never cover everything, you know?
Yeah. When you look at, like, you know, it's not a brag so much, but it's cool to be in the same state as like Nick Redfern, Lyle Blackburn, and Ken Gerhard, you know, the three titans. And it's like, oh yeah, those guys are just a little, a short drive from me. Like, you know, a lot of researchers end up looking at Texas and going, holy crap, this place is rich with the unsolved.
It certainly is. And even like Austin, there's like, you know, Miles Lewis, who I love, and some other, like, I don't know if some people have passed away, but like Texas definitely has like a big place in the high strange, like lore and history. Like it's one of those places.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, the Lubbock Lights. Oh, we could go. We could Lubbock. I may have to have you back on for an entire Texas episode. That would be so fun.
For sure. Yeah,
that would be so fun.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of, like, just off the top of your head, I know this is kind of hard to choose so fast, but like, are there any like non-Dogman cases in the Lone Star State that you are like especially fond of?
Yeah. Oh, I got one right off the dome, actually. There's a story, I kind of mentioned it a moment ago. There's a story here in San Antonio called The Dancing Devil of El Camaroncito, which means little shrimp. And this took place, it's actually there's a nightclub called the Little Shrimp in Spanish, and it was over on Highway 90, far west side. Used to be far west side. We've grown far out into the scrubland now. But anyway, this took place on Halloween night of 1975, so perfectly thematically appropriate. And the story is that these people were gathered at this nightclub, which is a real place, and I'll get into that in just a second. And this stranger comes in wearing a dazzling white suit, and he's an impeccable dancer, and he dances with all of the girls, and everyone's so impressed with him, and oh my goodness, what a handsome boy. And then they look down, and his feet are all messed up, to put it simply. In some versions he has goat hooves, in some versions they are chicken feet. And of course everyone goes into a panic and freaks out and says, what is going on? He runs into a back room and either escapes through a window or vanishes and leaves behind him a puff of smoke and the smell of sulfur. Now, of course, we look at this and go, Halloween, people were drunk. He was probably wearing a costume. It's also often brought up as a cautionary tale about the dangers of like going out and dancing and drinking. And we see versions of this same story pop up in other areas where it's like, you know, the girl's mother told her not to go out to the bar, but she did, and she met the devil. Like, you know. So it kind of has those tropes of folklore. But what I really like about this story is that there is a group known as the Hellfire Club that was in operation.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, they were in operation in Ireland during the 1500s. And there is a very similar story of someone showing up at their club one. And they were supposed to be, you know, these debaucherous, Satanist, awful people. They did human sacrifice, according to some rumors. Whatever. History is written by the victors. But the story goes that this gentleman showed up and basically follows the same story. He was very charming. He played cards with them. Then they realized he had goat hooves, and he disappeared and left behind the smell of sulfur. I love this story because I love connections between old folklore and folk tales and the modern day. And the actual building, El Camaroncito, was closed, sold to different owners off and on for a lot of years, became a strip club called the 411 for a very long time that advertised a free breakfast buffet. And I know that because it was 3 blocks. It was the building to this day sits 3 blocks down the road from my wife's childhood home. So I drove past this place every day for more than 10 years, kind of watching it deteriorate and then watching it be built back up. And while it was being demolished and sat pretty much just on stilts, one day I went in there and took pictures and came home with a cinder block. So it's a
Yeah. That's great though.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun for me because I got to look into it firsthand and kind of document this building. And now it's a grocery store. It's owned by La Michoacana Meat Market. It was their 420th location in the state of Texas. So it's fun for me because these stories, while they're old and they stick around, and we can debate whether or not there's anything to them, they do have connections to older stories, and they also teach us about the history of our neighborhoods and what's going on around us. Like, I know all this random information about this old derelict building that I otherwise would have no idea about because maybe there was a monster there. So yes, it's fun.
Well, and it's like, look, if God, you are speaking my language here because I'm very into folkloric ostension and like ostension in general. And folklore, whether people like it or not, is very important to culture in societies and small towns even. Like, even if they're just these cautionary tales, sometimes, not all the time, there is a kernel of truth in that folklore. And sometimes people believe this folklore and start integrating the folklore into their life and acting out the folklore in an ostensive way. Thus making it kind of real, so like it's like, I'm not saying that's like the extreme version of what can happen, but like, all folklore is important. All folklore should be documented.
Agreed.
So thank you for sharing that story. I have never heard that, and I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
And also the thing with, like, the smell of sulfur. Boy, do we hear about that with High Strangeness, with UFO cases, Bigfoot. Like, I mean, it's not just, apparitions of the devil or something like that, or demonic, quote unquote, demonic stuff. You will see sulfur appear in different manifestations. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a recurring pattern. And that's another thing that's fun about this stuff. And, I'm sure we'll venture into this territory whether we want to or not. But when you start finding these connections between different phenomena that are seemingly disparate, but then they have these common factors, it's like, wait, what? Wait, we have to start all over again. And
right.
But that
no,
might be another
but you're
hole,
so right. I mean, like, Joshua Cutchin, I love his work so much because what he does, I mean, in my opinion, better than anyone, is he does comparative analysis. Like, he has a whole book about smells. To me, that is great, and there's another guy, I think, W. something Watson, and he wrote a book about high strangeness and mist. And I'm like, these are really good comparative analysis to take these stories, and there's this reoccurring motif in them, and let's deconstruct that. And maybe, like, I just think that is like such great work, and I love it. I love it. And folklore is just a big part of this.
I agree. Yeah.
So I like, look, this thing of ours, to use a mafia phrase.
This thing we got here.
This thing of ours, right? So, like, you now do this full time, like you mentioned. So how did you kind of make the jump from being someone who's obviously intensely interested in this, like more than a hobby, to just leaning into it and making it your career?
Yeah. I mean, I have to give credit to, the people around me, because I don't think anything good happens in a vacuum. Everybody at Small Town Monsters, Seth, Heather, Courtney, Zach, Jason, Mark, I'm going to leave somebody out, guys. I'm sorry. I'm not that smart. Has been incredibly, like, supportive and encouraging and kind and just good people, good friends. Like, I got to get to know them at a time in my life when I was sort of reconstructing my identity, just becoming a parent and changing careers and stuff like that. And having them around was great. Shannon, oh my God, Shannon LeGros, she's a saint.
She really seems so cool. I've never met her, but she's awesome.
Fantastic.
I need to get her on my show. She's great.
She's cool. I'll put you in touch. Yeah,
please do.
So it's just meeting the right people at the right time. I don't have the marketing chops to get 2 books published and put out documentaries. I can't do that. And then it's also just like, I spent 10 years in residential apartment management, and there are things about it I love, but at the end, I found that it was taking more from me as a person than what it was giving to me. And I couldn't do that anymore. So I was like, what can I do that's not going to do that and is also going to allow me to be around my son during these first few formative years of his life? And I can't think of anything else I could do right now with my present skill set that provides me that flexibility. So, but at the end of the day, man, just, being around the right people and being able to make those connections, there's a lot of just people took a chance on me. Seth took a chance on me as a first-time author, and then putting me in a documentary and basing a film on something I wrote. That's a writer's dream. I don't care who you are. Anybody who's ever written anything wants someone to call you and say, can I adapt this into a film? We've all dreamed about that. Yeah.
To see your words put into motion is something special, and very few people get to do that. I will say, though, I will give credit to Seth and that team for recognizing talent. Because Seth, by the time they, acquire you or had you join the team, they were well established. They were known for doing good work and seemed like really cool people. Yeah. So that's a very big testament to you and your skill set and your dedication to the topics, because they're not just going to bring someone on, especially at that point when they were chugging along and doing really well. It's like, if they're going to add anyone, it's going to be for a good reason. So
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, obviously, Seth, and that's part of running a company is recognizing talent. Like, it really is. That's a gift. Some people can, some people cannot,
Yeah.
And that's why, production companies, they live or die on that. So that's fantastic. Well, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to jump into your book and just kind of I guess, I don't know, do you want to talk about the book and the documentary in a separate manner, or do they kind of flow together as
however you want to do it?
It's really, it's really up to you. I first off, folks, the easiest thing to do is to watch the documentary. It is so fun. I did not know much about the Dogman phenomenon. Just cursory stuff, but this gave me a good feel for the details and how people are investigating this manifestation in modern day. So I'm going to hand it to you. How did you start getting into Dogman in Texas?
Yeah. So it started, you're talking about local legends and stuff around you. That's where it started for me. I was looking into things that were nearby that I could do a podcast episode about.
Hell yeah.
Excuse me. I think it was the 3rd episode of Hey Strangeness. So I've been doing it for maybe 6 weeks. And I was chatting with a family member who to this day remains anonymous and will probably continue to remain anonymous. So I'm trying to make sure I don't say the wrong words here. But I was chatting with a family member and said, hey, I've been reading into, all this weird stuff lately. And he's like, oh, yeah, you've been doing the Bigfoot things. That's cool. I saw the podcast. And I was like, yeah, I had just watched the Bray Road Beast documentary from STM, and then immediately purchased and read The Beast of Bray Road by Linda Godfrey. And thought, this is incredible. Because when I first ran into the Dogman stuff, I rolled my eyes and I clicked over to a tab about UFOs. I was like, guys, come on. We have a hard enough time getting people to take UFOs and Bigfoot seriously. And we've got a lot of evidence for those. Why are you doing this to us? I thought it was like the same as Slender Man, no, we know where this came from. And then I'm talking to my relative about that, and he goes, I saw something kind of strange once. And this was before I went into the Dogman stuff. And he describes it to me, and I kind of look at him for a second. I'm like, you mean like this? And I pulled up, an illustration from the film of The Beast of Bray Road. And he goes, yeah, it actually looked pretty much a lot like that. And he describes what we would, right? I got chills. And he describes what we would think of as an atypical roadside Dogman sighting, crouched on its hind legs, manipulating something with its front legs or hands or paws or whatever, makes eye contact, watches the vehicle pass by, and then starts to stand up on 2 legs. And beat for beat, you see reports like that all throughout Linda Godfrey's work, all throughout message boards that talk about the Dogman stuff, even in these documentaries like the Bray Road Beast. This is a pretty atypical Dogman sighting, and it's coming from someone not only that I know personally, but who I know has no interest or knowledge in this stuff, who is not trying to tell a story to get me excited. There is zero reason for them to do that,
and they want to remain anonymous. So they're not trying to gain off it, which is always a good sign.
Exactly. Yeah. That this person actually appears in the Dogman Triangle film on the phone. That's an actual person. That's not an actor. I just called them up real quick from my phone and we recorded it, and that was the end of it. But when it's a real person that and this person is a business owner, a parent, a veteran of the Afghanistan conflict, not someone who goes around making this stuff up. If you want a credible witness profile, That's what we've got here. So I was like, well, wow, what if this isn't the only one in our area? So I go over to the National or the North American Dogman Project website, and they've got a really useful tool on there that's like a map where you can see different encounters that have been reported. And I pulled the map up and kind of highlighted the location of my friend's encounter, and come to find out there are 2 more. And together, these 3 sightings make up an area of about 700 square miles. And that's where the term Texas Dogman Triangle came from. So then I did the episode, put it on the shelf, forgot about it for a little bit. And then STM reached out and they're like, hey, would you be interested in writing a book with us for STM Publishing? And I was like, have you been reading my mind? Yes, please let me do that.
Wait, but were they aware of your work into Dogman, or just like a book about anything? They were interested in you as a writer, but not necessarily anything specific.
Yeah, it was kind of a general thing. They were, it was like, hey, what do you have any ideas? We think you might be a good fit for our publishing branch. And I'm like shaking, going, oh my God, And I was like, yeah, here's 3 or 4 ideas. And Texas Dogman Triangle was in there. And I was like, I think this could be worth looking at, because we have Dogman reports from Texas, but as far as I'm aware, there's not a dedicated work to it. And Seth and Heather looked at it and like, yeah, that sounds great. So I start working and I start looking, and it turns out there's a Dogman report down by San Antonio. And then there's another one by San Antonio. And then there's some up by Houston, some up by Dallas, some over by the border. By the end of the day, for the first book, I think I had 23 potential Dogman sightings pulled from the NADP, from other books. I found one in Fate magazine from the 1950s that hadn't been reproduced anywhere else. It was mentioned a couple times online, and I couldn't find the text. So I had to track down a copy of Fate magazine on eBay, and then we actually did get the rights to reproduce it. So you can read that report in its entirety again.
Amazing.
But it took me on this whole journey where I was like, this phenomenon is not only legitimate in that it's distinct from a lot of the other stuff we think of as cryptozoological or paranormal, but it's also heavily concentrated here in Texas. And even with looking at all these other reports spread out across the rest of the state, you still had most of it concentrated within a triangular area that starts at Dallas-Fort Worth and meets down at Houston, San Antonio, and then covers a lot of the land in the middle there. And of all the reports I looked at, I believe it was 23 total at the time. 17 of them fit into the Dogman Triangle, and then the rest were outliers in different areas.
That's incredible.
Right? Like it became so weird, because I was like, I just need a catchy title for this podcast episode. And then going on this whole journey, I was like, wait, there might actually be something here. Yeah.
Right.
And certainly we're going to see sightings in areas where there are people. So the towns around major population centers, there are more people there to have these sightings, and that makes sense. So of course we don't know the whole scope. The triangle itself may just be a null idea. Maybe one day we'll have more data. But at least what we're seeing right now with the reports I've gotten in the intervening now years, the book's been out almost 2 years now, it seems to be pretty consistent. There do seem to be a concentration of reports within that area. So,
like geographic, I guess, like, are there wide swaths of like forest, or like, like, is there, I mean, you were mentioning a couple of major cities, American cities within this triangle, but is there parts of this, triangle that are just really desolate or forest covered state parks and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's one thing that's cool about Texas is, it's so vast. So we have a lot of opportunity for different biomes. We have coastal areas. We have areas that are swampland. We run right up to Louisiana. We have areas that are just what we would think of as pretty barren scrubland, where it's fairly flat. It's a lot of plains, dry grass. We have farmlands. We have tons of national parks. We have over 200. I always miss the number when I'm in interviews. We have over 200 ghost towns in this state.
Whoa.
Right? Like that long stretches of highway, huge metropolitan areas. We have some of the biggest cities in the country. But then we have tiny little towns that are just 300 people, 400 people. We do actually have a Bigfoot, Texas, that has nothing to do with Bigfoot, but there's only like 100 people that live there. So, and then of course you go down further south, you're getting into more desert, rocky areas. We have mesas. We don't have proper mountains, but we do have a lot of dips and rises in elevation, depending where you go. Rivers, lakes, creeks. We've got a little bit of everything except like extreme winters. So the opportunity for most animals that can exist in 90 to 100 degree heat to be here is pretty high. It's pretty high.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is so interesting. So I got to think, after, the film and the book, that if people have a Dogman encounter in Texas, you've got to become, I know there's like, a lot of famous cryptozoologists around Texas, but like you have to be the sort of de facto person that people go to.
It's I like to think that. I like to think of myself as a Texas Dogman guy, but
Yeah.
I'm still new. People like Ken and Lyle and Nick
Sure.
who have been in this game for years, like they're always gonna get more calls and more emails. But I do get contacts from people who I otherwise would never have heard from or heard of, who would otherwise have no interest in me, who are like, hey, I had one of these encounters too. I'd like to talk to you about it sometime. And that's pretty cool. Like, just aside from seeing people engage with your work and find value in it, it's cool to also kind of provide a point of contact for people who are like, I don't know what I saw, but now I know I'm not the only one who saw it,
Right. And like, I don't know how these reports come in like exactly, but do you get kind of a sense because, I mean, I'll tell you right off the bat, you have talked to more people of witnessed Dogman than anyone I've ever met. I can safely say that. But I want to know, like, are you getting a vibe from people on what they think they're seeing? Like I guess to be more specific, like I guess take Bigfoot for example. There are people who think they're seeing like a flesh and blood creature we just haven't discovered yet, or like a missing link, yada yada yada. And then there's some people who think it's, kind of lies more in the paranormal, supernatural realm, or it's a mix of both. But what is kind of like, would you say if you were to like have a little like pie chart graph of what people think, like what are the most popular theories from the witnesses, not necessarily the researchers?
Yeah. So once you get past the I don't know what I saw, it was just weird, which, of course, there's always a percentage there. There is a very noticeable split between people who are convinced that this is an organic species, some kind of hybrid canine, some mixture of maybe large dog breeds and wolves, which I do believe there's precedent for, and I feel I can make a fairly compelling case for. Or they are interpreted and experienced as being something that is very much intentionally malevolent. I guess we'll say evil. That they feel very strongly they have encountered something that is otherworldly, that is spiritual. The word demonic is used a lot. I feel that word gets overused in this field of study in general, but that is very pointedly the term that is used when describing some of these encounters. And some of them do have more bizarre aspects, like you mentioned mist in correlation with paranormal phenomena. I can name you 3 Dogman cases where before the creature was seen, there was a strange mist that rolled in. There are cases
that is just a thing, man. With all this stuff with UFOs, Bigfoot. I mean, good Lord, it is really something.
It's pervasive. Things like mind speak. We hear about mind speak sometimes in the Bigfoot world, where people think they're receiving like telepathic communications. That comes up in these reports sometimes. They're described as being almost human-like in the way that they move and behave. When we have auditory reports or people report hearing something, they'll describe those calls often as being human-like. So there are all these little things that it's hard to pin on a natural animal, because we know canines can walk on 2 legs. They can do that. They don't because they're not anatomically built to do that long term. But we do see examples of canines adapting to 2-legged locomotion to overcome an injury, an illness, a deformity, and they even do it in the wild. We have examples of foxes doing that. So
deer can do that too, right?
I think they can. I
think
if
there's some brain disease that makes them like I think so. I heard it.
The chronic wasting disease. The whole
maybe
I
think it makes it.
Yeah,
I think it makes them do like odd things like that.
Yeah, because their bodies aren't built to do that. So there's a theory that like, well, these could be crossbred mutations. Like, say you take a wolf and a fox and a particularly smart Labrador, and there's some German Shepherd and Mastiff in there. Theoretically, you could end up with a really large dog that, for one reason or another, decides it wants to walk on 2 legs. I personally feel there's a case to be made for that. I've talked to a couple of veterinarians who disagree with me, but now I'm showing my ignorance. But my point is that like there are
but like, I mean, look, you're not saying this what it is, but you're open to it. I think that's good as a researcher for you. You know?
Like we can't totally write off the possibility because we know it's possible. And I have even had a couple veterinarians go, "Okay, I guess you have a point there on that one." So I'll say that. But again, it's not supposed to do that. So that's when we start getting into the more supernatural aspect of it. And then we look at like, well, we've been talking about upright canines since literally ancient Mesopotamia. This is not a new idea. And so I think for a lot of people, when we hear werewolf, we get hung up on the Hollywood interpretation. But if you look at human history, our ancestors regarded werewolves as being real for much, much longer than we have regarded them as being fictitious. And
Interesting.
you know, that takes us back to the ways folklore influence us and help us develop as a species. But the fact is, your great, 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 great Irish granddaddy believed these things were real. That to me does not mean nothing. So
yeah,
I think I got away from your original question. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. No. Well, I mean, look. The question is a jumping off point, and I mean, you went deep on it, and that's what I want. That's what I love.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
I do have a question for me, and this is just I am professing my ignorance, because I'm not really sure. Like, is there because like from what I know, a werewolf is a man that under certain conditions, like a full moon, becomes a wolf. Is Dogman viewed differently, or are there people thinking that Dogman is like a more of a werewolf thing, or are they? I guess, in your opinion, as a researcher and investigator, do you see them as two separate things?
Yeah, this is an important question, and this is something that no matter what I say, someone is going to disagree with me on it.
That's fine,
because that's the best part. Let's kick the bee's nest.
Yeah,
but you're right. The interpretation is often that werewolf means a transforming human being, while Dogman means an organic, biological, undiscovered species. The problem is that we don't know what either of those things actually are, other than eyewitness reports and the folkloric record.
Right.
Very often, the eyewitness reports cross over into the folkloric record, like in some of the stranger cases I mentioned a moment ago. The etymological roots of werewolf and Dogman are pretty much the same thing. Werewolf comes from ancient Germanic, or not ancient, but old Germanic dialects, the original werewolf, which means wolfman. Same in France, you have the loup-garou, wolfman.
Yeah.
Dogman, wolfman, they essentially mean the same thing. And the other side of the coin for me on that is that I think it's important to remain consistent with what witnesses are describing. And there is, I feel, not talking about you, of course, but certainly a tendency on the part of some in our community to take eyewitness encounters and reword them, or swap out terms, or say this witness witnessed something that is clearly this, when it's not clearly anything. We don't know what Bigfoot is. We don't know what Dogman is. We don't know what ghosts, aliens, or extra dimensionals are. So if I'm going to take these people's stories at face value, which I feel is important as a researcher, I think it's also important to remain consistent with the language that they use. And very often what is described is, I saw something that looked to me like a werewolf. So in my mind, those terms mean the same thing. And also, how would we know the difference? Like, how would we know the difference between a supernatural being in its animal form and a normal animal in its everyday form? We don't know what these things are. So I use the terms interchangeably. I know there are other researchers that feel that way. I won't speak for any of them. And I know there are people who disagree with me as well. And that's totally cool, because I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, like, no one's right, no one's wrong. I mean, like, the thing is, we don't all agree on like the definition or labeling of these manifestations at all. But I love that answer. So would you say, like, if you get a report and there is a supernatural bend to it, that people tend to call a werewolf in their description, or a Dogman, or is that not really something that it's just kind of random?
That's a very good question, and I'd have to go back and look at some reports, but just off the top of my head, I don't think there's a big difference. You'll have people that say, like, I didn't, obviously I don't believe in werewolves and I'd never heard of Dogman, but this looked like a werewolf to me. The witnesses who I've talked to who have done more research into it, who have become captivated by it, after having their experiences, they'll also use the terms kind of interchangeably. I can mention, well, he's in the book and the documentary. I can mention Mr. Martin Groves, who, any of your listeners who are in the Dogman world know who Martin Groves is. He's considered a very credible witness who's had a couple encounters with these things. He's a law enforcement officer. And in my chats with him, he'll use both terms. So.
Is he the Land Between the Lakes guy?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're gonna get to that, because I think I find that, and I thought that the Small Town Monsters documentary, which I know you had a hand in.
Yes.
Did you write it?
Yeah, the Land Between the Lakes one was
kind
of. Thank you. Yeah, the Land Between the Lakes was kind of sort of a similar thing with Dogman Triangle. I wrote a book, and Seth was like, let's also make this a movie. That was a little different. That was kind of conceived originally as a book movie tie-in. So I got to write the book while we were filming the movie, which was really cool.
Hell yeah.
It's a lot of fun to do that. But the flow was a little different. Yeah.
Right. That is so interesting. So, I mean, if you don't mind, I do. These are just some questions I have.
Yeah,
I haven't looked
hit
into
me.
Dogman a ton.
Hit
like
me.
you're my Dogman source. I'll
Thank
be
you.
honest.
Honored.
Well, I think I chose well. But
hope so.
have you I guess just using Nebraska as an example, I have been able to find old cases like going back over 100 years ago where they're clearly describing a Bigfoot type creature,
Mhm.
but they didn't have the term Bigfoot. But they'll often use the term hair-covered wild man,
Mhm.
who's
Mhm.
killing chickens in Farmer Jenkins property or something like that. And I know Nebraska's not the only place. There's Tim Renner's work where he's finding really old stuff going in Pennsylvania and so on and so forth. But is there a precedent in American history where in old newspapers from the early turn of the century or the 1800s where people have what you would describe as a Dogman encounter?
Definitely. I mentioned the story from the 1950s out in Gregton, Texas. There is the case of the Defiance werewolf, which was in the 70s in Ohio. There is the Converse werewolf, again, going back to Texas. That's supposed to be late 1800s, early 1900s.
Wow.
And it's interesting because these stories, at least if we're going to the turn of the century, they predate the werewolf movies. So it makes sense that people mid-century would be using the term werewolf because there were tons of werewolf movies out at that time. I think something like 16 came out in I'm going to get all my years wrong, but there was a year in the 70s. I was a
teenage werewolf. Yeah. There was a ton.
Yeah. About the same year, there was an encounter out of Meridian, Texas. And about that same year, 16 werewolf movies came out between America and Mexico. So you do have to allow for that. But they were still using the term werewolf, even in these pre-cinema reports. And that's super interesting because that's kind of one of the differences between Bigfoot and Dogman as an area of historical study is that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, those are recent terms. Those came along mid-century. Werewolf has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we sort of already had this frame of reference in these stories to go, well, I think I saw a werewolf. And now a lot of people go, oh, well, maybe they just misidentified Bigfoot. And I think there are definitely cases where that is what's going on. If we're to believe both of these creatures exist at some capacity, there has to be some misidentification. But then you have these very detailed reports where they're like, no, it had an elongated canine snout. It had pointed ears. It had a tail. It growled like a wolf. Well, that doesn't sound like Bigfoot to me. So,
that is incredible. Oh, see, I'm so I'm very excited to hear that there is historical accounts in America of Dogman. I think that is, oh God. And I mean, I am a big believer in while you can wait around for new reports, which is wonderful. New reports obviously are where the juice is at, but
the good stuff.
But in the meantime, going back to these cold or old cases and really trying to, because with modern technology and the internet and newspapers.com, we can find out so much more than we could 10 years ago about these old cases. And I think it's so important to not just brush these aside as an example to bolster your theory, but to understand what was going on at the time. And these old stories somehow are just as important to me as brand new ones.
I agree. Yeah. And I think it gives us context. It's so easy to look at a one-off report, especially some of the more outrageous ones, and go, that guy was having a bad day. That guy had too much to drink. That guy was high. Whatever. Yeah. I have thoughts on all of those dismissal theories. But anyway.
Me too.
Right.
I've been all those things many times. And let me tell you, you don't hallucinate off that stuff.
Exactly. Thank you. People should do some research, read some scientific papers on what it takes to really hallucinate, because it's not like people, oh, well, you hear this in stories. He saw a UFO, but he was on his way home from the bar. You got to drink a lot to hallucinate a UFO.
To hallucinate a nuts and bolts. I mean, I'm sorry, that's not a thing. And people are like, he was smoking a doobie and then he saw a Bigfoot. I'm like, dude, no.
Do you know what weed is? But
do you know what weed does to you? It's not. I mean, I wish it did that. No, man. I'm so with you. I think that as a dismissal, it's or even there's always a judgment. It's well, it's just some guy in a trailer park. I'm like, why?
Why does that matter?
why bring class into like the discussion? Like it just
right. Like there's this idea that, you know what, my life sucks and I'm poor. I'm gonna say I saw Bigfoot and that'll fix all my problems. That has never happened.
No, it's nonsensical. In fact, I mean, I will tell you right now, I'm more interested in someone's, a person in rural America who has a dramatic, whatever encounter than I am something coming out of the military. That I almost dismiss offhand. Like, I will never be able to prove that. I think there's an agenda behind it. I don't like it. I'm putting that to the side.
It's all controlled.
It's controlled. There's something behind it. If they're releasing that information, there is an agenda behind it. I'm sorry. There just is. That's not conspiratorial. That's just understanding big government. So, it's, but I think I don't think so as much anymore, but there was a tendency with a lot of researchers and these big organizations where like, well, if it's not a military person or someone who has a trained eye in the sky, then it's, invalid. Where I'm like, that's terrible research.
It is. And a lot of these stories end up getting cast by the wayside because they're not considered credible, at that point in time. How many UFO cases have we heard about where somebody just reported what they saw because it was their job as a law enforcement officer or an air traffic controller? I'm thinking of a case that I believe Unsolved Mysteries covered it on the recent reboot where an air traffic controller reported seeing this thing. That's all he did is like, hey, I see something at these coordinates and I don't know what it is. And the next day at work, he was the UFO guy. He had to leave his job, leave his town, like ruined his entire life. So I get so frustrated when I see these more skeptical researchers or even non-paranormal journalists, whatever you want to call them, who are like, oh yeah, but they try to just dismiss it with something that, look, if you really think about it, that doesn't dismiss the experience. That doesn't invalidate the testimony. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I think while I know things are hoaxed, like, I don't think it's off. I don't think it's like something that like, I like, to me, to like take any kind of case and say, oh, it's probably a hoax, but I'll look into it. I don't think that. I mean, like, to hoax something, it takes effort, time, and money, and I don't think that many people are willing to do that. I really don't. Like,
no.
What's the point? No one's ever gotten rich off a hoax, have they? No. I mean, probably, but like, it's rare.
Yeah, there's like instances where they gain some popularity and then everybody realizes they're full of crap and they become a pariah in both communities, the paranormal and the mundane world. And I've sat down and just as a thought experiment, I've sat down and gone, okay, based on everything I know after writing these books and participating in these films and talking to all of these eyewitnesses, what would I need to do to pull off a convincing hoax that someone could not debunk? I'm pretty sure I could not do it. Like the amount of effort, the amount of checks and balances, people who are looking at this stuff, the ways people can analyze photo and video now, I don't think I could pull off a convincing hoax. So when we try to, these normal everyday people who are just a farmer from Kentucky who are like, yeah, I saw this thing. And it's like, well, it's probably a hoax. Why? It's probably not a hoax, at least not on this person's part. You know? So then you get into, oh, well, someone else is pulling a hoax on them. Who in their right mind is skulking around the woods of Kentucky or the Texas Hill Country dressed as what looks like a very dangerous animal? These people have guns. Like,
you will get shot.
You will. Yeah. So
I just spent a week in Kentucky doing a little research project, and we were always told, like, we had like a kind of a guide, and he was like, whatever you do not step a foot onto private property because they don't call the cops. The cops tell them to shoot people.
It's going to take the cops 6 hours to get there. Like,
it will take them 6 hours to get there. Like, there's not a police station, for an hour. They are told to shoot people.
Yeah.
So I was like, I took that very seriously because, like, I'm not looking to get shot just yet. So
yeah. Got a few things I'd like to take care of first. Yeah.
Exactly. I love Hey Strangeness, but I don't love it that much. You know what I'm saying? One question, and you did kind of mention a couple, like a little aspect, but like when you do get these reports and the point of view of the experiencer is that or like, I guess here's my question. Let me rephrase. When you do get, some kind of like aspects or like, symptoms of supernatural high strange with these Dogman reports, what kind of shape does that take? Like, I know you mentioned mist. You've heard mist being reported like 3 times.
Yeah.
But is there like orb for not like light phenomenon or any type of other like weird vibe or like kind of an Oz effect where the reality seems kind of off and funny? Like,
yes, that's a great question. And yes, there is a lot of correlation with other phenomena. If for no other reason, just geographical overlap, you'll get Dogman sightings in areas that are also thick with Bigfoot sightings. Well, that makes sense. But then there's also UFO sightings kind of prominent in this area. And these things also seem to pop up a lot near graveyards and cemeteries.
Right.
What is that all about? So
Uh-huh.
it sort of starts to go like, we can start dismissing these things as normal animals, but then it doesn't make sense. Sorry, I forgot the question for a second. What it starts
You're in the zone.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep going. The recurring aspects we hear about, again, the mist, that comes up a lot. That's an interesting one because there's a creature in Indian folklore and mythology, religious texts, shows up in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, known as the Rakshas or the Rakshasa. And
Right.
it's described as appearing in a cloud of mist, as being able to change shape, and as being able to devour human beings. Well, what does that
Yes.
sound like? You know, so those are some of the things we see pop up a lot. Glowing red eyes are a thing. The eyes are very often described as being glowing, and we get different colors. We get red eyes and yellow. Those seem to be the two
Right.
most prominent. But then you'll see some where they're blue. You'll see some where they're white. We could write that off again and say, well, yeah, different dogs, different eye colors, different genes.
Mhm.
Sure. Those are probably the most consistent things. And then the biggest one, I'm going sort of out of order here. The biggest one is that people will report this sense of overpowering dread, fear, anxiety. We get into physical symptoms a lot of the time, loss of bodily control, nausea, symptoms that we would describe as like you've just been hit with a chemical weapon. And one witness who is a former law enforcement officer who knows what it's like to be hit with a chemical weapon described that sensation as the worst physical sensation he'd ever experienced. So
Jesus.
that, right? Like, that's weird. A dangerous animal will set off our fear response. That's normal.
Yeah.
But we don't see a bear throw up all over ourselves. And that, again, is not a story you're going to go and tell people for fun. You don't want to be like, oh, yeah, I went in the woods and I got sick all over myself. That's not cool or fun.
No,
that
it's
sucks.
not cool. Yeah, it's humiliating. Yeah, I mean, like, and I feel like, natural inclination of most people is to avoid being humiliated.
Yeah. So then you're not just in, I saw something weird and all of a sudden you're the guy that saw Bigfoot or you're the guy that saw a werewolf. Now you've got all these other details that if you're making them up, you've got some really bizarre agendas in mind. Like you have a long-term plan that none of us are capable of understanding is what I think.
Right.
So at a certain point,
yeah.
Right? Like at a certain point, it just becomes easier to take these stories at face value and ask, okay, if the events described are accurate, what's going on here, as opposed to trying to pinprick little details and be like, well, clearly this didn't happen because it was Bigfoot. I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. It's like, I guess, is there in the Dogman community, I mean, I guess I'll use the Bigfoot community as an example. There definitely is like I don't think it necessarily means people are fixed in one belief or the other, but like there definitely is some people who are definitely, it is flesh and blood.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people who are, no, it is supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think Timothy Renner, who I really, really admire his work into Bigfoot, he, I think at this point would pretty much say it's a supernatural, Bigfoot is a supernatural being. But then I feel like most, and the BFRO, that's definitely a flesh and blood reporting website where they're not going to include the weird stuff for sure. I know people in the BFRO and they're like, no, they leave those cases by the wayside because it doesn't really fit what they're trying to do.
I've heard that too, yeah.
And I mean, MUFON would be the same way if they leave the high strange aspect out of UFO sightings and encounters because they're trying to be taken seriously by quote unquote science, which I'm like, good luck with that.
Yeah.
but is there like separate camps in Dogman?
Definitely. I follow a lot of discussion groups on Facebook just to kind of see what people are saying and keep an eye on the pulse. And
it's part of it.
Yeah. And I rarely engage because no one cares what I think, but I'll see threads that are 75 comments long of people going back and forth saying, no, it's demonic, it's spiritual. No, it's an animal because of this reason and that reason. And the arguments continue to just sort of contradict and overlap on each other, but there is definitely a split.
Right.
I can probably say safely that most of the people that I regularly consult with or, try to sort this stuff out with seem to lean in the direction that there is something beyond just a normal animal. And I definitely see myself going there, but in order to remain grounded scientifically, I like to continue to, I don't know if build both cases is the right way to put it, but
but like be open to both ideas.
Yeah, like sort of profile both types, if we want to call them that, of encounters, and both opinion sets that it is an animal, and try to build that case, and then okay, but maybe it is something spiritual, and try to build that case, and then see if those data sets overlap. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it's confounding, you know.
But I think that's honest research, you know, because like, I mean, you know, maybe we'll find out what it is. You know, maybe if someone will hit one with a car and we can study it. I kind of doubt it, but like, you know, maybe, you know, you never know. But until then, it's, I think, almost disingenuous to like plant your flag on one side or the other. Even if you don't like what the other side is saying, you find it far-fetched, you can't discount it.
I agree. Yeah.
Especially when you're getting reports and aspects and symptoms of other high strangeness things. It's like, well, you don't want to just like, you want to like, I think some researchers will just throw those cases out. They don't fit my agenda.
I agree.
So,
and
I like how you approach it. I really do. Like, it's 1 foot in, both sides. I think that's honest.
Thank you. And I get that to an extent. If you're trying to analyze a phenomenon based on specific parameters that you identified in recurring cases, then in a way, if you're just doing that, polluting that data pool with something that doesn't fit in there at all, I get why you would want to omit that. But we simply cannot. It is impossible to embark on any kind of a comprehensive exploration of the Dogman topic without weighing both sides, because there's just, without having numbers in front of me, there's a pretty 50-50 split between these more supernatural crazy ones and these more like it stood up on two legs and ran off into the bushes ones, you know. So it's hard. And this is kind of where I'm at lately. Why can't it be both? You know, if we're to assume there is a supernatural realm, and we're to take the stories that our ancestors have been telling for centuries as hints as to what that supernatural realm is like, the strange imitates the mundane all the time. How many representations in folklore and even modern cryptozoological encounters do we have of these really outrageous, crazy monsters that represent known animals? La Lechuza of Latin American folklore is a shape-shifting, red-eyed owl representing witch. But owls are a real thing. So, you know, kelpies and that's probably the wrong word. I'm trying to think of a sea monster. What's the thing that looks like a seahorse?
Oh,
no, it is kelpies, the shape-shifting horse. Yeah, horses are a real thing. So I'm not saying all of those things are real entities necessarily. La Lechuza, I'm pretty convinced, is a real thing. But we see this all the time, where the supernatural realm emulates or represents the mundane world. So
absolutely,
if one of these things can be real, why not both? And I'm not saying that's my theory, but that's kind of where my head spends time lately, because I've spent a good 3 years now going back and forth between the animals and the monsters, and it looks like both to me. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you know, like that's the same thing with UFOs, man. It seems like UFOs emulate something that's a little bit ahead of us technologically or evolutionary, you know, like flying dirigibles, you know. I mean, like it's you, whether you like it or not, you have to pay attention to how these things manifest and change over time. And if they do, that kind of tells you something, that it's like we're part of the creation of maybe this stuff, potentially. I'm not saying it is.
Well, it takes you into that realm. It takes you straight into that realm. Again, whether you want it to or not, if you're looking at it with an open mind, it's very hard not to go down that path of trying to ask, was John Keel right? Is the super spectrum a thing? I don't know, but maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But but you know, like, especially like, you know, I know they're like, I love John Keel books as entertainment. Like there's no, you know, there's problems with John Keel books in terms of like, there's no sources.
Yeah.
He literally could have been making everything up. I'm not saying he was. I don't believe that he was. But like, there are, you know, it's like, it is hard to like research a John Keel book. It's like, whoa, this case is amazing. How do I find out more about it? That doesn't exist most of the time.
Yeah, I've run into that a few times.
We're trusting that he got this report from somebody and he reported it accurately. So, you know, it's like, take that for what you will. And like, but that doesn't change the fact that his books entertain me to no end, and I love the stories so much.
And it presents, there's a lot of ideas in there that, you know, like we said with the super spectrum, that kind of comes from, at least in concept, Carl Jung's archetypes and the little red book and all that stuff. And people have different opinions on Carl Jung based on his other beliefs and all that stuff. That's fine. But like, archetypes are observable in human nature and human societies and storytelling. So the idea of a pervasive, overpowering something, whether it's a collective unconsciousness or even some kind of extra dimensional force that contains all of these things, you know, I don't think that's an entirely wrong idea to chase. I don't know.
I don't either. Yeah, it's like kind of like, there's a handful of researchers who are saying the same thing in a different way. Like Valet didn't call it the super spectrum, but he calls it a control system, which is virtually sort of the same thing. That Kim and Keel have very different, or they explain it differently, but it's really, they're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
I think, Valet comes from more of a place of science, so it's using scientific terms, where Valet is, kind of a more every guy, blue collar, average Joe.
Sort of a rogue agent.
Yeah, right. But both equally important, I think. Like, we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up, so for somebody who has like a very like average knowledge of Dogman like myself, there's two cases that I know about and have known about for a long time. And that is the Beast of Bray Road, which I love it. I've been there. It's super fun. Wisconsin is a very spooky state. And then there is the incidents that happened allegedly at the land between the lakes. And you have written a book about it, and you were involved in the documentary, which I loved. And it came out this year, not that long ago, actually.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Please, can we talk about the land between the lakes, my friend?
Yeah, I'm cracking my knuckles here. So this is...
Yeah, you're getting ready. The shoulders just went back.
Go.
I love it.
Let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this case is really cool because when I started with it, I was kind of in the same place as the Dogman stuff. It's one of those cases that has reached so much notoriety that non-paranormal TikToks talk about it. It's in blogs, it's in newspaper articles. It pops up every Halloween as a, here's a spooky story that you may not have heard that might have actually happened. And the story is that late 1980s or early 1980s, that a family were camping in the land between the lakes, and that they were killed by one or possibly a pair of these Dogman creatures. The story originated in the public eye with a documentary called Hunt the Dogman, Hey Strangeness in Kentucky, by long-term, very well-respected cryptid researcher Barton Nunnally. And it contained a testimony from a woman named Jan Thompson, who described hearing this story from the responding law enforcement officers. She was a gas station attendant at the time. There was also a written version of her story that appeared online, I believe, before the documentary came out. This was 2007 that this premiered. So, and I love that documentary because it is very much a straightforward, I'm going to say low budget, but I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean, the whole point of this film was to tell and document these stories, not to like do flashy effects or anything like that. And that's what it does. And that's kind of where it originates. So then it, of course, makes its way to the internet, the discussion forums. People start going back and forth, speculating, trying to pick it apart. And it kind of reaches this status as like a pop culture urban legend sort of rumor thing. We went to the land between the lakes to do this documentary because that's not the only report to come out of there. Of course, we mentioned Martin Groves a moment ago, who had his very striking encounter in the year it's either 1990 or 1992. I keep doing this to myself.
And he's the former police officer, correct?
Yes. What's cool about Martin is that not only will he say, yeah, I've lived in this area and also seen these things, but there is no doubt that he is who he says he is. So many people have called his former police station to, corroborate his testimony that they're tired of hearing from people. There is zero doubt that this guy is who he says he is, lived the life he says he lived, and has been for years kept this experience to himself. After he had his encounter, he started documenting reports privately as a law enforcement officer. People would report them in, he would document them, and there was kind of a tacit understanding within the law enforcement in that area that we're not going to pursue these or take them any further, is to hear him describe it. So he's just been doing his own research for decades outside of the public eye in this area where this notorious sighting and very grisly encounter is supposed to have taken place. And there are other reports, but those are the two that, were kind of anchoring us to this area right now as a larger community, just to give my opinion. So we go out there, we're doing all of these interviews, and I went from being like, this probably did not happen at all. Like, I believe there are sightings in this area, but I don't believe this event took place, to believing that there is a root event that caused this to happen, or this story to take off. Now, that could be that someone was attacked by a coyote or a fox, and it blossomed from there in the retelling. That's certainly something that we see happen all the time. Eli Watson, in my book about this, Hunting Grounds, Dogman of the Lakes from Small Town Monsters Publishing, makes the point that this could be more a story about the land between the lakes itself. because before it became a national recreation area, it was a residential area where thousands and thousands of people lived, up to 2,000 American families by some estimates. The Tennessee Valley Authority came in, said, you guys got to get out, invoked eminent domain, flooded the whole area, created the largest inland peninsula in the United States, and made this big, recreation area that's full of all this high strangeness stuff. So there's also the idea that the story of this creature coming in and destroying a family could be an allegory for what families who lived in the land between the lakes experienced. And if we're talking, of course, we talked about folklore and the human impact. I think it's always important to bear that in mind, because whether or not that's the case, that really did happen to those people. And there's still a lot of resentment in that area today from people who they were children and they watched their parents' homes be demolished because they had to get off the land.
That would suck.
Right? Like that's terrible. That's traumatic. Moving sucks.
Yeah.
So
it's a nightmare.
Yeah. And people started settling in the land between the lakes in the 1700s. These are ancestral lands, but they belong to the Native Americans first, and that's important.
Right.
What's also interesting, though, is that according to the National Land Between the Lakes website, Native Americans didn't settle in this area permanently. It was a shared hunting ground. And of course, that plays into that's because they knew that the Dogmen were there and they stayed away from them. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. But there are several other sightings that I wrote about in the book. And then Martin, of course, has documented dozens over the decades. And there's definitely a concentration of this phenomenon in the land between the lakes. As far as, the massacre story, which a lot of people refer to it as, I kind of swing back and forth. But we do know that story has been present in the land between the lakes area since at least 1982. So the idea that it's a product of the internet age, that it's just a creepypasta, is provably false, unless we're going to disbelieve these residents of Grand
very
Rivers,
interesting. I was going to ask that question. Okay, that is, I like that. That's interesting.
Right? That's where I stopped. Once I found that out, and that was in an interview with Mr. Elijah Henderson of the Cryptid Studies Institute, who also appears in the documentary. And he's been researching this case for years with his father, Johnny, who's sadly passed away, and his sister, Gabby, who's still very active. And they've talked to several witnesses who've said, I heard this story in the early 80s, right around the time that it's supposed to have happened. So now, not only do we predate the internet age, and we can write off the creepypasta angle, but the original stories come from right after the time it's supposed to have happened, thereby giving us less time for the story to be reinterpreted and twisted. Doesn't mean it happened the way it's presented. I don't know, but it does, to me, indicate that there is, like you said earlier, some kernel of truth at the root of this story.
Now, I mean, I'm sure people have thought about this, but you can FOIA police departments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if anyone's tried to FOIA the police department from that area to get police reports. I mean, I'm sure people have thought about doing that. Yeah.
They have. We tried, actually, during the filming for that documentary. It was so fun. We were doing on-the-ground research while we were at our shooting location, trying to find additional details, because we would hear things from the people we interviewed, and we're like, well, we didn't know that before. Let's use that and run some searches based on that. And we consulted every public database we could get access to. And Heather Mosier is a college professor. A lot of people don't know that. So she has access to a lot of document databases and repositories that your average Joe like me does not. And we couldn't find anything. We also went back to the records for the part of Indiana where the family is alleged to be from. Also couldn't find anything. But then you listen to people like Mr. Groves who will say, he's never told me dead. Yeah, there's a cover up in play. It's more, there's a reticence to write some of this stuff down and to talk about it on the part of law enforcement.
Right.
And this is me talking now, whether it's because they know about it and want to cover it up, or because I think it's more that if you're not interested in Bigfoot, you don't have time for Bigfoot. I think it's probably more that than an active cover up. That's just my opinion though. You kind of go, okay, well, if that's true, people do unfortunately get injured and killed in the land between the lakes sometimes. Did this report where some details changed and it got shuffled under a different pile somewhere? That's possible too. It could also just be a clerical error. Documents get lost. So I try not to go too deep down the conspiratorial hole, because that can, I think you and I talked about this last time we spoke, that can take us in some very dangerous directions.
It can, and also it rarely bears any fruit too. It's there is something to be said to try to find out the origin of these old stories. But I mean, at a certain point, you have to give it up. You're just not gonna,
Yeah.
I've tried to do that here locally in Nebraska, like to try to like track down the veracity of stories that happened like 70 years ago. And at the end of the day, like I will always try, but boy, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, because it becomes circular. Like it becomes a
Yeah.
whole thing. Like if it's a conspiracy to cover it up, they failed because we know about it, except they didn't fail because we can't validate it. So,
Right.
but then, so it must be real, but it can't be real because we can't validate it, but we can't validate it. That means it was a conspiracy. Like it just goes in a circle. You bounce back and
Yeah.
forth between these two poles and there
Right.
is no answer. There just isn't.
Right.
So
Right.
I try to, again, take the stories at face value and listen to what people are saying. And the facts are that we have modern witnesses who will look you dead in the eye and say, I saw one of these things. We have, by definition, it is an urban legend from the early 1980s. And then we have other witnesses who say, yeah, I heard this story before the internet was a thing. I heard this story before the Dawdleston messages, and that was 1984. So,
sure.
it's I can't just write it off. I can't. If you
Right.
have just one or two people, even if those people are credible, there are a lot of ways that you can go, okay, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. The more witnesses you have, the more difficult that becomes. When those witnesses don't know each other and their stories have never been shared publicly anywhere before, then it becomes even harder. And that's what we ran into in the Land Between the Lakes. So,
Yeah. Well, and the police officer story is wild as hell too. Like, I mean, that's and the way he tells it. I mean, I don't know. It's very convincing to me. Like, I guess like I will never know for sure, but like it does make me feel like when I saw him interviewed in the documentary that he believes what he's saying. I just don't see the
100%.
benefit. There's a person when we're off the air, I want to put you in touch with who's from Kentucky as well, and he has had some experiences, and he has documented some experiences in this area, and I don't think it's terribly far from Land Between the Lakes. But you should talk to this person. It's Glenn Quiggins. I've had him on my show.
Okay.
I don't know if that name rings a bell to you.
Sounds
but
familiar. Yeah.
You need to talk to him. He's got some information for you. I'll tell you that much right now.
I'd like that.
And what's funny about because you were mentioning the police officer, like the sheriff of that county had a dramatic Bigfoot experience and reported it. Came out in the open with it. It was actually on one like a whatever Bobo was it Finding Bigfoot, one of those shows back in the day. And then he lost the re-election for sheriff. It became like a laughing stock of the county.
That's
it ruined him. You
have so much more to lose. Like same with Martin. You don't serve as a law enforcement officer for 30 years dealing with the absolute worst of humanity, retire, have, your spouse and your kids and your grandkids, everything set. You don't do that and then go, you know what? I've got an idea. This is going to make me popular. Even if everyone takes your story at face value, all of your friends and family say, okay, I believe that you believe you experienced this, which, let's be honest, the world we live in, that's not the most likely scenario. You're still the guy that saw Bigfoot. You're still the guy that saw a UFO. And I think you and I know, Steve, from working behind the scenes in some of the media aspects of this community, you don't immediately get $1 million when your first interview drops.
No.
Like there's not,
you hope to make your money back.
Like I've said this before, there's not sufficient financial incentive with this stuff to destroy your life. There just isn't. So and
because when people say like, well, he was on Finding Bigfoot, I'm like, let me tell you, Finding Bigfoot is a non-union show. They by no means have to pay him $1. My guess is he got to be in the show. They fed him a free lunch, and that is it.
That's
and
usually,
what happened in return? He lost his job as the sheriff. So I mean, like, weird thing to make up, man. I don't see what the upside was for him. So
exactly. And I've talked to other people who have been interviewed by some of the bigger network shows, and that's a very similar experience. They take your story. They usually have you sign something to say, like, we can do whatever you want with this. In some cases, they have you sign a thing that says you can't ever tell this story again to anybody else. We don't
own it now.
We do not do that at Small Town Monsters. We do the opposite of that. Thank you.
Right.
If anyone's wondering.
I can tell you guys all seem very ethical. That's why I love this STM for a multitude of reasons. But
thank you. It's not. People think, oh, I got on TV, I'm set for life. It is not the case. In a lot of cases, you're seeing people who are worse off after making these appearances and coming forward with their stories. And I think that matters. I really think that matters.
It does matter because motivation is, whether you like it or not, I do think very important when you're taking in these stories from people.
Absolutely.
God, that is so interesting. Like, I guess one more question about the LBL.
Yeah.
And that is, I guess two questions. Are there still current modern cases coming in? And also, are there any other manifestations of high strangeness that have been reported in this area?
Yes and yes. The most recent report I've taken from the LBL was from Gabby Henderson, who I mentioned a moment ago. Hers was in May of 2023. You can see that in the documentary, and it's written about in the book as well. So at least within the last year and a half, we've had some documented sightings. I'm generally of the opinion that we're only hearing about maybe 1 in 7, 1 in 3, just based on the law of sales, to put it that way. So this is conjecture. I'm confident there's a lot that just hasn't come to the surface. So, but it is ongoing, definitely. And then the area itself is kind of like Texas, man. Like a lot of other areas we think of as vortexes or portal areas, there is a lot of strange stuff there. Ghost lights. Yeah. There's more Bigfoot activity than there is Dogman. I had to weed through a lot of Bigfoot stuff to get to the Dogman stuff for this book.
Yeah, Kentucky has a ton. Well, first off, Kentucky is one of those places all over that state that has so much stuff going way back, but it has a ton of Bigfoot.
Yeah,
reports.
There's UFO sightings. There are a lot of haunted locations and ghostly areas. There are a lot of abandoned settlement areas, farmhouses. There are cemeteries that are underwater now because they flooded this land and turned so much of it into rivers or lakes. It was the land between the rivers, became the land between the lakes. So you're talking about a whole bunch of weird stuff all packed into the same place. And this is something I wrote about in the book that I don't see talked about a lot, but the Kentucky Hopkinsville Goblin case, notorious cryptozoological / UFO case, that's only about 27 miles from the land between the lakes. So if you're looking at a map of the US, they're in the same place. They're pretty much in the same place.
And then Edgar Casey's from Hopkinsville. I mean, that's, I mean, there's a lot of weird connections.
The Mantell UFO sighting, which, where a U.S. fighter pilot crashed while pursuing a UFO, which Small Town Monsters has a documentary about coming out later this year. Lost Contact.
Beautiful.
Keep an eye out for that.
Beautiful.
That UFO, based on where the sightings came in and the direction that Mantell was traveling, was moving in the direction of the land between the lakes. So there's a lot of stuff that's concentrated in this little geographical area that sits right on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. And it's not just Dogman, it's not just Bigfoot. You could do a whole book about pretty much any paranormal topic just in that area and not run out of material. Strange disappearances, man. Jesse and Jared Doyle from Hellbent Holler. You can see numerous examples on their YouTube channel because they've done extensive explorations. They were instrumental.
I like their work. Their videos are really fun.
They were great, man. We actually went out in the field with them and investigated the site, the potential massacre site, during the filming of that doc. So cool. They're such great people. But, they've spent countless hours in the park and they've uncovered numerous instances of tents that are just abandoned, just left there with people's clothes, housewares, books, things you wouldn't leave behind, tents that are just ripped open in some cases. And there are mundane explanations for those in any case. We know that a lot of houseless individuals will settle in the LBL because they camp there. There was flooding in the area that drove a lot of people out of their homes, and so they went where they could, but it's strange that they'll go back to some of these same areas and find an abandoned tent that wasn't there before. So the short answer is, that place is weird as heck. And of all the places
I love it.
It's so cool, dude. Of all the places I've visited or investigated or researched, it is the weirdest. It is definitely the weirdest.
Okay. Oh, I gotta go there.
You gotta, man. Like, you're digging in the leaves and you go down a couple inches and you find Pepsi cans from the 1960s. Like, the place is a time capsule.
I love it.
Yeah.
Little treasures everywhere. And let me. So, oh boy. Okay. Gosh, I have so many questions for you.
You're good, man.
Like, you mentioned a sighting of Dogman by a road. Okay. I have this real pet fascination with roads and high strangeness because, and like, look, I know it's a means of travel, so people will obviously see something because there's people on roads. But, however, there are so many cases going back hundreds of years of UFOs landed in the middle of a rural road, or Bigfoot's always crossing a road, or the lady in white's often seen by the road. And now you're telling me that there's a Dogman report by a road. Obviously, you don't probably know the answer to this. If you do, that's amazing. But, like, what is it with roads? I know roads, there's a liminality between,
Hmm.
about roads, but this is a motif I just can't ignore any longer because it keeps on popping up. I have right in front of me, I have a shelf of books full of high strange stuff. And I bet in every single one of them, there's a case by a road.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like, what's the deal with roads, Aaron?
That's such a great question, man. I hadn't thought of that. And even going back to the original Texas Dogman Triangle, those were roadside sightings. They all seem to. And for an animal that wants to remain concealed, that's
Why?
staking out a certain amount of territory, why are you hanging out
Right.
next to a road? Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're,
Why is
yeah.
Bigfoot waiting just at the right time to cross the road and barely get hit by the car?
Yeah. Why? Why not just wait until the car is
There's
gone?
so many. I have one, two, three. Like I can think of 4 cases just in Nebraska alone where it's Bigfoot crossing the road.
Yeah, that's
Like,
such
what
a
the
good
hell?
question, man. And that's probably something I should think more about. But I think there could be something to this idea of a liminal space, an in between area. Because you think about like, what's the state of mind that you're in when you're passing vast distances on a highway? You zone out. You go somewhere else mentally.
Yeah,
your
you're
body
hypnotic.
takes over.
Yes, yeah.
So are we in a more perceptive state at those times? Wow. Oh man.
It makes me wonder. Yeah, because there's a lot even going back into Asian history of like the dragon paths, and in fairy faith they have like the fairy roads, the roads of death, where the fairies traveled in like a straight line on a road. Like there just is like going way back into history. Like a guy like Joshua Cutchin can talk about this extemporaneously much better than I can. But roads are a player with high strangeness.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's very interesting to me because I did not know that you are finding Dogman sightings by roads.
That's so
Interesting
interesting.
to
I
me.
hadn't even thought of it from that angle, man. To be honest with you, I could do a whole cross section on roadside sightings. Oh man,
Yeah,
you
well,
just gave me an
let's
idea.
compare some. Yeah, well, hey, man, keep it in the back of your mind because I'd be interested to see what you discover. Like,
Yeah.
just like how many cases you find by roads and like why,
Interesting.
especially some of
Yeah.
these really desolate roads. It's a very odd pattern that keeps on emerging, whether I wanted to or not.
Yes. Oh man.
I want to ask you. So, like, what's your process of investigation? How do you when you're getting these reports, how do you kind of suss out, because I'm sure like I get, since I started doing the podcast, I will get not a lot, not at all, because I've never done, written a book or anything, but I do get some people like on Messenger, like, or on social media, who will write me like, "Hey, can I tell you my story about seeing a fairy?" I'm like, "Sure." And I feel like based on some of the way it's written, you can kind of suss out something that is interesting or someone messing with you.
Yeah.
Like, what's your process like when you first start investigating a case?
Yeah, and I think it's good you bring that up because there are people out there who are trying to cut their chops as writers or actors, and they'll choose the paranormal
Right.
world as a place to do that. Like that's a known fact.
Right.
But for me, it's like I try to gather data from as many sources as possible because if you find the same story repeated on YouTube and Reddit and TikTok, you're going to find that it becomes circular. These sources are citing each other. So first, I try to cut through those circular data pools and get down to like the next level. Like with the Land Between the Lakes, you can hear that story in a million different forms online, but I need to know where it came from. I need to know who first told this story. How did it get into the public eye? So I try to get to the base as much as possible. I think it's cool to mention how popular a case has become or how many other websites are talking about it, but ultimately that's just, it becomes clickbait. It becomes cyclical data. So that's kind of my first step is try to get down to the base, determine where this originates. I try to look at things contextually, like what's the history of that area? Where did the people come from? What's the history of native displacement here? Because sadly, that's all over this country. Are there connections to existing legends? Is this something that the Europeans maybe brought with them? Like I try to identify as many potential origin points as possible.
Oh, brilliant. I love this.
Thank you. Because if we're starting from the beginning, at least we're working with as many facts in air quotes as we have,
Right.
And then from there, I do go to those other sources and say, okay, well, has the story changed? Has it modified as it's traveled? Are we seeing details that look like they've been inserted later on? Not for me to say this is true or this is not, but I think all of that really matters when we're talking about, these people were maybe killed in the early 1980s, but then the first version we can find that states detail X didn't come until 1995. Stuff like that is really important. And then it's just trying to present as neutral a take on it as possible, because I've got
Mhm.
opinions on all this stuff, and my
Of
opinions,
course.
yeah, like you said, my opinions change every day. Tomorrow I'll probably spend 10 minutes thinking this is all nonsense. What am I doing with my life? But
Right. I
that's
hear
just
you, man.
right. Like, it's just the way it
Yeah.
goes. But ultimately,
Yeah.
I try to present the information with as neutral a tone as possible, hide my own agenda. Every writer has an agenda. It's just a fact. Conceal
Mhm.
my own agenda and let people form their own opinions. And I find that's the most enriching way to go about this stuff, because if you, like you said earlier, you come down hard on a hard stance, it limits your thinking as a
It does.
researcher. But then, hey, some fact could pop up 10 years from now that invalidates everything I've just said. So
Absolutely.
just trying to remain open-minded, trying to remain subjective to the data, but objective to the phenomenon itself. I think those things are important.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
That is my style of research and investigating, my friend. That really is. I just feel like it's the best way to take in as much information and facts and non-facts about any given case. It really is. I don't see another method that would trump that one.
Thank you.
At all.
Thank you.
I want to ask you this, and I don't know this for certain, but like, have you ever, when you're out in the field, like you may be investigating a location where a dogman has been reported, have you ever, and I'm not saying like seen a dogman, because you probably would have mentioned that up top. By the way, wait, you buried the lead, man.
We gotta start over.
You have the most like dramatic story. Yeah. But have you ever, like, because I've talked to quite a few researchers now, and one thing not all of them, but investigators. One thing I have heard a handful of times is when they're investigating something, like a dramatic UFO encounter, they'll go to this location and maybe they won't experience a UFO encounter, but something else kind of weird happens to them. And I'm curious, like, when you've been out in the field, have you ever had any kind of like weirdness pop up that you didn't expect, or
It's a good question. I guess I would say not really.
Uh-huh.
Again, the LBL is such a strange place in general. Even if you don't know anything about it, when you go in there and see the state that it's in, these old abandoned structures and just this kind of derelict thing, like places like that, you're going to get a sense of weirdness.
Of course. And when you have the stories percolating in your head that you know about, yeah,
it's impossible to separate. I get more, I guess, a sense of like history, like, wow, this thing happened here, a person had this experience here, and this location is significant for that reason alone, in that it altered the course of someone's life. But I guess the short answer is not really, man. I've always kind of thought of myself as a spectator with this stuff. Like I said earlier, I've had a couple of weird experiences that I can't nail down, but they're in niches that are not my area of study, if you want to put it that way. So it's more like, I feel like I'm more of a spectator. Yeah.
No, I same here. But something I do wonder, and this here, and if you'll allow me, I'm going to get step into the speculation station. Please. Here, but
Love it.
And get very woo woo. But like, sometimes I think there is no such thing as a hoax, in a way where, like, let's say like there is this famous or just like sorry, let me rephrase. I'm very interested in the magic of place, right? This idea to where like there's a story associated with a location, and whether the story is true or not at a certain point almost isn't important, because there now, to me personally, is a magic involved in this place. Like to Kelly Hopkinsville, there's some information that I've been made aware of about the whole Kelly Hopkinsville thing that now makes me really question the veracity of the case. There's some old Kufos articles where you're like, oh, I didn't know about this part of the story. And so, but no matter what, that area, that little farm is magical to me, whether the story is true or not, because it's been imbued with these stories in this folklore or mythology, or something really happened. But at a certain point, that almost becomes not important, because the place is magical because of the story.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not sure what my question was on that.
No, I agree with you though.
Like, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess my thing is, like, as a person who investigates, like, sometimes I have been out, I will go to places just to experience the magical place of where like a UFO landed, or there was these Bigfoot encounter, someone saw a flying winged human. I will go stand in a field, stare at a cornfield, and go, wow.
Yeah.
Maybe or maybe not a UFO landed here in 1954. And I feel vibed out. I actually get like weird feelings in my stomach.
Yeah. I get a charge out of that. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like the stories almost like I wonder, like implant data onto a location and almost charge it in a weird way.
Yeah.
This is my own thinking, and I have zero evidence, obviously, and I sound like a crazy person.
No,
but like,
dude, I'm with you.
I can't help but feel that way.
I'm with you. Yeah, there's a sense of, I love how you put it, a sense of place, like just really going and connecting with this event in a physical way, and that in a way that makes it real. Like I think we mentioned this last time we spoke. Again, the Hodag. We're pretty sure the Hodag doesn't exist, but it's now an integral part of that community. It's now a part of those people's heritage and their lives and their folklore. That makes it real. There are businesses built around, the Hodag that support people's families. That's a beautiful and wonderful thing, that we can have a story that's so outrageous and crazy and people go, hey, yeah, whatever. But it does all of these real things in the real world and makes a positive impact in real people's lives. That's a magical thing. I love how you put that.
That's a magical thing. Yeah. Well, the old occultist Timothy Allen Greenfield said there's no such thing as a hoax. Because like no matter what the story, there are people out there who will believe it, and this becomes magically real to them. And I'm not sure if like I think that's right or wrong. I just think it's an interesting idea. Like that there's no such thing as a hoax, because there are, whether it's true or not, there is something important left in this area.
Right? Like somebody,
a story, I guess.
Exactly. Like we could point to this there's a video floating around right now about an alleged Bigfoot sighting in Kentucky or Oklahoma, whatever. It's an advertisement for a place. We know that it's fake, but all of a sudden everybody's talking about this and looking at it and trying to figure out, is this real? It's not a real Bigfoot sighting, but it's causing real events to happen within this community and taking people on these journeys of thought, their own little investigative rabbit holes. And it has a real impact. Impact.
And that's why, when out, like I have friends, like a lot of my, like, normie friends, I'll call them. They're like, God, you're ridiculous. You believe all this stuff. I'm like, I don't. I leave the word belief out of it. But like, and I always try to tell them, whether you like it or not, this stuff is important to culture and society, and has actually shaped not shaped your life, but it's been integral in your life, and you maybe don't realize it.
I agree 100%.
Because like, like it's like when you take, like if you were to run your finger over the globe and point randomly at a place and invent a story about that place, give it 10 years. All of a sudden, this place is charged, and other people like, whoa, I experienced something at this location, even if it wasn't real or not. Like it does do something. And that's why, like, at the end of the day, if all this stuff is folklore and legend, then that's just as interesting to me, because it definitely has a human effect.
I think so. Like with going back to the werewolf Dogman thing. Okay, maybe it's an entirely fictitious invention, and in reality, no one has ever actually physically seen one of these things. We still have to ask, why have we been talking about this concept for thousands of years? Why are we so fascinated with this fusion of man's best friend, an animal that we see a lot of ourselves in, and our own physicality? Does this represent something that we want to be? Do we want to be a hyper intelligent, battle ready, unstoppable canine? Some days I definitely want to be that. So to me, that is as important, if not more important, than whether or not these things are real. What does this say about us? What can we learn about ourselves by examining the stories that our ancestors thought were so important that they've been talking about them since the jump of civilization?
Oh my God, what a banger of an answer. Buddy, like, this has been so much fun. I would love to have you back on, because I didn't get to even close to all the questions.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
Really and truly, like, this has been so wonderful for me and such an education, because I learned so much. Dude, this has been great. Please tell the listeners where they can find your books, your documentaries, all your work, please.
Yeah, please. Well, head on over to smalltownmonsters.com. That's going to be your landing page for all of the STM documentaries, for my books. They are available on Amazon, so if Amazon's better for you, you can go through them, that's fine too. You can follow me on Instagram, hey_strangeness. And of course, all the STM social feeds, where I'm pretty much every major account. I run those accounts, so you can hang out with me over there if you would like. And then we do a weekly live stream for Small Town Monsters at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. So you can come hang out, and I host that show, so you can come ask questions and hang out and just get a little behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, that's a good song.
I just want to say one more time, like, in a world of very mediocre paranormal content, you guys are the cream of the crop. You rise to the top. Now I'm doing a Cypress Hill song. I
was like, that sounds familiar.
It does. I rise to the top. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just love what you all have done. It's just for me, because it's folksy high strangeness.
Thank you.
Do you know what I'm saying? I love things that take place in rural areas. There's something spooky. I would say also, it is the time of year where we all love spooky season. These documentaries are exactly what you need.
Yeah, man.
I can't recommend it enough. I'll put direct links to the two films and your books. Go consume Aaron's material. He is doing the good work. You have a good point of view, and I really I feel like you're a fair and honest researcher, and we need more of you out there. So, buddy, well done. Bravo to you.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
You're doing important work, man.
That means
you're doing
a lot.
important work.
I appreciate it, man.
Oh, dude, of course. Well, buddy, thank you so much for coming on the show. And folks, thank you for listening to another episode of High Strangeness. Enjoy your dinners tonight. Peace.